Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast, where every week a few friends get together with their randomly designed, kind of sort of hack-jobbed, MacGyvered together story elements, and we combine them into a franchise about a guy who... I lost it. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining us. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
You know, it's not easy to come up with these funny little things every week.
I know, and you just do it. It's great.
Yeah, well, first ever whiff. It's gotta happen. If it's gonna happen, it's gotta happen in episode 240 something.
Well, you've just had 2 weekends of garage sales, so you're entitled.
I am entitled. So does someone want to give a recap? I can give a recap of last week's episode.
Go ahead.
Sound good to everyone? Unless Seth, you burning to okay, you're not. Okay. So we are writing a interesting story about an interesting world. This is a world where multiple different sentient creatures have evolved or have emerged, however you want to say. There are aquatic creatures, there are avians, there's humanoid, there are dragons. Was there another one, Reed?
Yeah, the simian, kind of a great ape.
Yep, the great ape that's just now kind of beginning to make its sort of
right,
its mark. And your genre was really unique and interesting. What was it exactly again?
Well, I called it otherworld fantasy, and then I just sort of what got me going is this idea of the world with the different species that were sentient and could interact with each other as like aliens might, for example. And I was thinking, well, this is like kind of just, I like the name of the genre, otherworld fantasy. It just might open up a whole new kind of a group of stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we had a government type, which I had firmly in my brain. And then as soon as I started talking during this recording, I forgot. Seth, in 2 sentences or less, what was the government type?
More like a loose confederation of city-states that have circuit judges that kind of uphold the federal law.
Right.
That cycle through different places every 5 or 10 years.
Right. And then my something based on a book I'm reading, I was reading a book, it was a self-help book. So it's a magic system where you sort of sit and meditate on a specific problem or issue, and then after a certain amount of time, you will come up with the answer. Or not so much the answer, just the most efficient way forward. So if you can't sit and think how to turn lead into gold and come up with the answer, but you might figure out a way to purify lead to make it much more valuable, sort of thing. And this sort of magic power thing has become sort of the Turing test. Do you guys know what the Turing test is? It's like, I think it's like an AI. It's like an AI test that is supposed to. It's a test of a machine's ability to exhibit the intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. So it's like a test that AI will be able to do. That means I won't be able to know it's the difference. So that's kind of like what it is. It's kind of like the way in which we decide that these races have decided that sentience exists.
Right.
Is if you can manifest this ability, then you can have it. And so there's debates now in the world courts of people, you have these dissident species, they're not just races of the same species. They're dissident species all living in harmony, semi-harmony on a planet. And as they have some sort of conglomerate group of philosophers or scientists, they have decided that this is how you determine if someone is sentient, if that makes sense. And so the great question of the age is these sapien species that are evolving, these great apes, which were used as laborers and pack animals, as they begin to show more and more intelligence, more and more scrutiny is being done to watch them to see if they develop this ability. Because then that would immediately mean that there are 5 separate sentient species evolving on this one planet, which is unprecedented. Anyways, that was last week. So if you are like, wow, that's a lot of stuff, go listen to last week's and then come and listen to this, because this is part 2. Reed, what did you have for a story element?
Ka-Tet members.
Perfect. How about you, Seth?
Fiction by another name.
Okay, who wants to go first? I say, Seth, you do fiction by another name because it's going to be groundbreaking. You should explain what that is too, because I think that's the first time we've gotten that one.
Okay, so to kind of probably one of the easiest examples would be Lion King is Hamlet by another name.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Three Amigos is the Seven Samurai by a different name, right?
Sorta.
Sort of. Well,
yeah.
it's a comedic take on it.
Yeah.
But I know it's,
Look up here.
that would look up here.
I'm sorry.
I still
anyway,
haven't
so
seen Three Amigos, but
Okay.
I've heard it's great.
We'll remedy that soon.
Yeah.
Anyways, so fiction by another name would be kind of, I would hope not necessarily, because I know it comes up often enough, like what's his name did with the Aragon books,
Yeah.
where he just kind of mixed and matched and pretended like he came up with something original.
Yeah.
But more like Lion King, where it's Hamlet, but the Safari Kingdom.
Yeah, it gets to be its own, it can have its own flavor on the story, but recognizing that a story trope works if a story trope works, so absolutely. So what story is ours going to follow that's fiction, that's another name for a different fiction story?
So the first thing that had popped into my mind, if everyone's familiar with it, it's Fievel Goes West. Are you guys familiar with that?
5-0?
Fiveville?
Fievel.
Yeah, it's like the animated
5-0 goes
animated mouse. Isn't it like a Steven Spielberg film?
I think so.
I'm sure, Reed, as soon as you see the poster, you'll recognize it.
I have another one as a
This
backup
one?
if it's not relatively, because I know like that's more of a movie, but I mean it's still a story. I just figured that it might.
Do you not recognize this, Reed?
I do, but I've seen that before, but I don't know the story.
Okay, then I will go with my backup. The backup would be Ivanhoe.
Well, that one I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if Reed didn't know Ivanhoe, then we have some serious problems.
Yeah, I think we might be able to make that work. But yeah, so
Is Five
know I
Goes
read it.
West a story by another name of Ivanhoe?
no.
Okay, so give us. I think I've read Ivanhoe and seen a couple of movies. Give us a really brief explanation of the Ivanhoe story.
Right. So the Ivanhoe story, and again, I read it when I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10. And then I was trying to look something up because I know we talk about it a lot, different things. Sometimes like a lot from the movie. But anyways, I looked up and I was reading some of the book again, and it was like, oh wow, this is like a lot better than I remember it being even when as a kid. But anyways, so Ivanhoe is kind of a what's that when a parent disowned kind of heir to a estate in England, and he was off fighting in the Crusades with Richard, right? And he comes home. I think kind of the whole story is kind of some back and forth between kind of the Saxon culture giving way to the kind of the invasion of the Normans, who've I think at this point already kind of taken over.
Right.
Where then a lot of the, I guess you could say at that point, not that they were indigenous, but the more indigenous Saxon population was more sympathetic to Richard, because I think he was a bit more sympathetic to the Saxons. So anyways, so then you have kind of the tension between, the Norman and the Saxon factions. Ivanhoe comes back. He gets wrapped up in helping Isaac of York and his daughter, Rebecca or Rachel. It's one of those. I think it's Rebecca.
It's Rebecca.
So he gets, wrapped up in helping them, kind of goes, I think she funds to get him armor and stuff so that he can, represent in a tournament. And then kind of comes out that the Norman faction ends up, I think they get to the bottom of it. But anyways, they capture Rebecca and they accuse her of being, a witch. All during this time, I think Ivanhoe then kind of makes good with his, I think it's his uncle or it's his dad that's kind of the head of the family, or maybe that happens towards the end.
Yeah, that happens towards the end. Yeah.
And then you have, so it kind of surmounts up, I think, with one of the Norman knights has kind of fallen for Rebecca, but he gets chosen by his order to basically fight, kind of the, God defend the right kind of trial by combat. where then he's chosen as the champion to fight for her guilt, where then they get Ivanhoe to come in and be the champion to fight for her innocence.
Right.
And I think, maybe it's mixing some of the movies into it now too, but then in the end I think Richard comes back and of course Ivanhoe wins. And
Yeah, it's a great thing about intrigue and power struggles. The people, the Prince John has like been solidifying control. When Richard was away, the little brother intriguing at home, and he had swung a deal for an order of the Templars, and so he had some military might, but the Templars have their own kind of globalist agenda. And anyway, it's just a lot of, and then of course Cedric the Saxon, he's clinging to the old ways. He thinks that his his vision is for one day another Saxon on the throne of England. And
Right.
yeah, it's cool. And I think the whole reason he disinherited Ivanhoe is that he had gone off to fight with Richard, who was that pesky Norman. I think that was kind of the way it was spelled out. It's a great story.
It does sound like
His
I remember it.
Ivanhoe's Rowena grew up with as a ward of Cedric the Saxon, and they were in love as young people. And then he goes off in the world to do his knightly thing, and so anyway, it's great. So it's fun. How long does Saxons fight?
All day and
all
through the
day
night.
and through the night.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So there's like intrigue. I think that I should like watch a movie to get an idea of the plot. I don't think I could read a book in a week,
Yeah.
but I could definitely read a Cliff Notes because we'll want to follow sort of theme by theme.
Yeah.
But Reed can tell me which movie would be the best, whether it's the 1982 movie, the 1952 movie, the 1986 movie, the 1913 movie, the 2011 movie, the 1975 movie, the 1971 movie, the 1965 movie, the 1982
And then I think there's
movie.
a TV show too.
Yeah.
I remember the
1995 movie.
1952 movie. That's got Robert Taylor and Elizabeth Taylor plays Rebecca of York. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll find and get that one. I'll watch that one.
Yeah, I'll probably watch it again too, but
Yeah. Cool. Reed, what's your story element?
Well, Ka-Tet members, the idea of Ka-Tet members wasn't something that I was even aware of until you, Levi, talked me into reading the Stephen King's Gunslinger series, the Dark Tower series.
Right.
And it's the idea that Ka is sort of like a force of the world, a destiny, thing that, in Wheel of Time, it would be how the pattern weaves the Wheel of Time weaves the pattern, weaves you into the pattern.
Right.
Well, anyway, Ka, oftentimes there'll be circumstances, things that will come up that will set you on maybe on a quest or on a journey, whether it's could be spiritual or physical, but in any case, and Ka-Tet members are a Ka-Tet is like a group of people that come together by the same forces of destiny, so to speak, to kind of either collaborate or be friends or be even antagonists in some regards, but iron sharpens iron, so to speak. So though all of those things can be at play, but in any case, there are 3 members of this Ka-Tet, and Carl is he's a humanoid. He is he had been formerly with the military police, and because of some people coming from the different settlements or different communities, so to speak, oftentimes working with the different judges and the local
Right.
trying to seek autonomy, but yet working together, for the common good, especially when there seems to be a need for military action. And one of the things that had happened as men developed is naval power. And immediately, of course, they encountered, and what happened was Carl was called in to investigate a problem where there had been some real pushback from the aquatic. They're a mammal, but they are aquatic. They live in the ocean.
Species, yeah.
And this species has a really intensified communication capacity. Like whales, they talk about how they'll speak over long distances and they can keep track of each other. And anyway, these creatures have the ocean was their domain, and had pretty much ignored the other species until the humanoids began to assert themselves via military power on the seas. And he had his work with a scandal where there had been some rogue elements in the Navy that had it was an incident that nearly broke the tenuous peace. And he set out to find out who was behind this kind of rogue element, and drew the attention of Kendra, who's a scientist and avian. And she had come across a similar problem with her people in a dispute with the dragons. And she was really alarmed because the peace that had developed in the world, was not very long lived. There had been
Right.
a history of tension, and she and a group of scientists that she had been associated with have been finding increased evidence that we are not alone, that there is people out there on other worlds.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so that's a whole wrinkle. Like, listen, guys, we got to figure out how to get together. And Gorgon is a guy that is studying engineering, and he is a former commando with the Simian military, and he is the Simian race, or the Simian species, is powerful, large, powerful, fast, athletic, and they make great warriors, but they're not as technologically advanced. And he has been studying engineering, and run into some there have been conflicts about, well, this is a great thing and he obviously has aptitude, but is he really somebody that we want to train in our technology? And so Carl and Kendra kind of pick him up, and as part of their their quest to bring unity and seek out sources of unrest, so to speak. Does that make any sense?
I think so. You said simian. Did you mean sapien?
Well, I use the word simian as a Google simian, just Simian. I've been in my mind, I've been thinking of that as a
Is it a department store in El Salvador? Read. I don't know.
okay, simian. Well, maybe I just made up a word, but it's this primate species, this ape-like, a great ape-like species.
Higher primates.
Okay.
Or higher primates. Yeah, there's a bunch of technical information here.
Yeah, I guess.
So yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was just the word that I was using for them in my mind.
Yeah.
To differentiate them from the humanoids.
Relating to or resembling an ape or monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally appropriate.
Okay. So Kendra, Dorgan, and Carl.
So these are three different people of three different
species. Yes.
Gotcha. So I have this idea that most of the species sort of have their cities where their culture and their species sort of is the most dominant.
Yeah.
Right. And then they have kind of border cities, and then there is, because of this loose confederacy of states, the government type, there is also sort of capital cities. It's like where the avian, humanoid, and dragon countries meet. In that meeting place, there's a capital city of all those three.
Yes.
And there's kind of one of each of these for every kind of mix. And in those places is where you have the most mixed of species. And then the farther away from that you get, the closer you get to the interior of the countries, the less you see of other species. Not because you're not allowed to, but it's kind of like taking a trip in China. There are certain towns in China where they don't have also English on all the billboards.
Right.
Because it's like, well, why would you go here? This isn't a tourist trap. This isn't anything. This is just a town,
Right.
Sort of idea. But I liked the thought that the humanoid, because I think we had said that the humanoids, there's a possibility that they aren't originally from this planet. They were like a colony ship that crashed and then has sort of evolved and assimilated themselves into the planet's ecosystem.
Yeah.
And maybe this sort of cerebral ability comes from them. Like they taught it to people, or, in some way, because the idea of 5 or 6 sentient species sort of evolving in a single planet is astronomically rare.
Yeah.
I mean, the chance of 1 is astronomically rare.
Right.
Um,
And then because of tribal, the whole notion of tribalism, I'm familiar with my group. And if you're not part of my group, you're one of the others. And I haven't a reason to trust you yet.
yeah.
And
What
so
if
go ahead.
what if all but one of them really came from off planet? Because what if the humanoid came from somewhere else? Perhaps, if they were advanced enough to that point, perhaps they were messing around with like genetic manipulation.
Okay. So there's like one base species that is the sentient species of the planet. It's the dragons, obviously, and everyone else is just kind of an offspring sort of thing. It
Of
could be
something else that
it
was
could
being tested or developed
yeah,
in
it could be something like these were all these different species were all in transport, and then it crashed and they seeded the world with all these different species, and then something like the question is who did someone else bring the power, or was the power on the planet already?
Yeah.
Because this power indicates is sort of an evolutionary. It's like this is an evolution to thought process. This
Yes.
is what we get when we get past problem solving. Problem making.
Yeah.
We get past problem solving, you get into problem making.
There you go.
Yeah, so the question is did it come from, I like the idea, Seth, of it, did it come from the planet, do you think, or did it come from, was it part of this genetic?
I would say in this case it would have come from the planet. I could see
Yeah.
how if, let's say, the dragon types were the original sentient one of this planet, that then maybe that was already their testing ground.
Okay.
And given the ability of, let's say the humanoid and then the other,
Yeah.
creatures that were, let's say, brought up to par for, intelligence and thought, and
it could be something as simple as the dragons, when their children are born, they pass on all of the knowledge. The parents pass on all the knowledge to the children, right? Like that's like a genetic thing.
Yeah.
And the dragons communicate telepathically. So then you introduce a bunch of these genetically modified creatures onto the planet, and then you have this super powerfully telepathic race trying to communicate with all of these things, basically forcing these things as brains to evolve to accept higher thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And the side process is that dragons have this ability. They had this ability at first, and they basically kind of not willingly, but kind of just through trying to communicate with these other races, taught them, their brains, how to do this thing. It could be something also that's talked about in the lore where the dragons didn't start talking to us until this certain time, 500 years ago, when at the same time that this ability manifested, because finally people's brains were sort of evolved enough to pick up on the telepathic nature of the dragons, because the dragons were like constantly bombarding us with requests for information. And so our brains had to like develop a way to deal with it. And that's what we got here.
Yeah.
Great. So the wise old man, he goes by Clevens, and it has a really unique mental disorder. He has an incredibly low IQ, which that's not the mental disorder. He has an incredibly low IQ. He's a very simple man. He hunts and fishes and sort of makes his abode on the kind of cliffs below where the main dragon broods are. And he has a really unique mental disorder, and that is that he has multiple personality disorder. So his mind will and has fragmented into several different separate personalities, partially to deal with trauma. Being a person with lower IQ, it was difficult for him to blend in with a society that sort of values a high IQ. There was a lot of trauma in that way, and this is one of the reasons why he kind of lives off by himself, is because he was sort of shunted out of society, right? He couldn't couldn't conform or keep up with where society was going, and society had no time to sort of teach him how to keep up or to accommodate for him, so he was shunted out. Now the thing is his main personality, the what you'd call the prime personality, very much reflects this kind of simple man who, long beard, unkept, fishes and hunts and carves and whittles and stuff like that, right? But the reality is that through his long life, he has been forced to learn how to deal with things. And while some people, when forced to learn how to deal with things, will change who they are, I don't know all the psychology behind it, so I'm not going to pretend to know how exactly multiple personality disorder happens. But what happened with him is these personalities would be formed and would arise and would protect him and would understand things. So the reality is that he doesn't actually he's not actually a low IQ individual. Very simple. The reality is that the personality, his prime personality, hasn't ever had to figure out any of these larger concepts because these other personalities have always arisen to deal with them. So, and one of the reasons why you might look at him and say, wow, he's kind of mentally disabled or kind of slow, is not because he is actually mentally disabled, but because there are oftentimes 3 or 4 personalities constantly at work in his brain. There just isn't enough bandwidth for him to sort of appear what we would consider cognitively normal. So
Integrate.
he remains just kind of a simple mind. But the reality is that 2 or 3 of these personalities are constantly at action. And since he lives right by the dragon's domain, they are constantly participating in this. So he is one of the only people who can be awake and alive in his active life and using this meditative power at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't run out of food, right?
Yeah.
He always knows where he's going. And because there are several geniuses complexes that live inside of his mind. So people will come to talk to him because he's considered a wise man, and he'll dribble on and write on chalkboards and stuff and say complete and utter nonsense for 30 days in a row. And people look at it and they don't understand it. And then he'll kind of straighten up for a minute and then change 2 numbers. And then the whole thing will make sense. And it will be like this genius algorithm.
Yeah.
And then he'll kind of laugh cheerfully and just erase it to draw a smiley face. And people are sitting there like, what's going on? So he's considered some part prophet, some part fool, right? There are certain people that he trusts, certain traders, certain, his tailor, the woman who makes his clothes, And so in this story, my idea is that he'll be sort of entreated to come into a situation, to view it, kind of Rain Man style, to kind of view it, and then kind of everyone giving him the side eye to try and clinch the genius answer. But he's constantly talking to himself. He's constantly the pitch of his voice is changing depending on who it is. And I want to be really respectful to anyone who's sort of, I'm not trying to demean or romanticize mental illness. This is just an aspect of a story that I think is interesting. And if you feel like I am being disrespectful, please let me know. I would love to talk about it. I would love to assure you that I mean no disrespect. But I think that this is a compelling and interesting part of the story. So that is the wise old man.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'd say that the dragons, he's kind of developed to a place that the dragons themselves kind of view him as their bridge.
Yeah.
They can look into his mind and they see these multiple thought processes happening, and they're like, wow, this is what we do. We hold multiple sets of thought processes in our brains at once, constantly weighing all the options. And look, that's what he's doing. He's the most evolved human being that exists. So no wonder they give him the high seat next to us. I don't know. So that's the wise old man. Anything you guys want to add to that? That sounds interesting.
The whole question is, who's driving the bus? The kind of the simple guy is kind of the guy driving the bus.
Yeah.
And just every once in a while, like, yeah, you can take the wheel for a minute and get your deal done,
Yeah, exactly. All of the other personalities that exist in his mind that were created firstly to protect him from terrible things and to do hard things for him when he couldn't do them himself, which is a lot of the case from what I've read about multiple personality disorder. They look up to him, right? Because he is the foundation personality.
Right.
Like they aren't interested in taking control. They're interested in protection, but some form of semblance of peace and symbiosis has been achieved here that isn't necessarily not like the goal for everyone. Forcing someone into a psychotic break where they form a new personality in order to deal with it isn't the goal. So it's like everyone can't become this thing.
Right.
And even this thing is seen as like, wow, it's really valuable, but it's really unfortunate that he has to struggle so much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So anyways, that's the basis of the story. We're going to do Ivanhoe. We got 3 Ka-Tet members of different species working together. We got, what did I say his name was?
Clevens.
Clevens going to offer some advice at the direst hour. We still don't know who the villain is. Do we want to try and figure out who that is before we sign off here? I'm always of a two minds. It's really easy just to say there's this tyrannical guy who's trying to take control, because that's kind of like
what bad guys do.
Yeah, it's kind of cookie cutter and everything like that. And then who was it that mentioned something about there were people outside? People were afraid of people from outside that was one of the Ka-Tet members, right?
Yeah. Kendra, she's avian, but she's an astronomer and a scientist, and the people she's worked with have discovered evidence of possible advanced life.
Right.
We are not alone kinds of evidence, and I don't know I haven't filled in the details on that and how, if contact is imminent or not. I don't know, but
right.
But the point is, she was motivated to, first of all, resolve the tribalistic factions within her own species that are threatening the peace with the dragons specifically, and was intrigued by Carl, who wanted to get to the bottom of who the people were that there's always dominance might have some value in the struggle between species, but you want to balance, and you want you want to have a symbiotic relationship if you're going to share the planet.
Absolutely. One last thing. Do we think that the humans know and remember that they didn't evolve here? The humanoid people?
I was thinking no.
Right.
And all this whole time that we've been talking, what's been flashing through my mind, Dragon Riders of Pern.
Right.
Because they had kind of a cataclysmic event where they had broken with their, they had been a settlement colony, from Earth, and because of the catastrophic, just survival scramble nature of their plight, they'd lost records, they'd lost the capacity to access old records. Their original colony was abandoned because of volcanic activity. So they were, and of course they, developed this relationship with the dragons,
Right.
And then of course, I don't know if it's like down the line there was a book, The Dolphins of Pern, where they had introduced dolphins from Earth, like, but genetically enhanced. And then they had, in the cataclysm, they had gone off, the dolphins had pretty much been left to themselves and had advanced as well.
Formed their own societies.
Right. And so I had that was one of the things that had come up in my mind as I was thinking about the Ka-Tet members. Anyway, that's another whole, that was one of those great storylines that fascinated me.
Yeah. Seth, who's the villain?
Let's see. Let's come back next week after we've brushed up on Ivanhoe again.
Oh, good idea. Well, clearly it's Prince John, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's going to be some kind of going out and then coming back, and then the power that has kind of festered in the homeland has turned against what is good, right, and true.
Yeah.
But let's watch Ivanhoe and then come back at this and kind of lay it all out with the story that we have written. Sound good to everyone?
Sounds good.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast. If you liked this episode, send us a big old fat, hey, I liked your episode, tweet on Twitter at @GetsBettercast, or send us an email, hey, didn't like the episode, bad job, at Waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. I would say if you send that bad email, don't forget to wait, because it does get better.